well be critical. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Well, a little earlier I spoke to a resident of Jebel Nafousa, around 120 kilometres south of the capital Tripoli. He says Gaddafi has no control of neighbouring cities.
It is now under the control of Libyan protesters. Many of the army personnel have joined the revolution and taken side with the people. As to the cities and the streets, many people took to the streets protesting against al-Gaddafi, asking him to step down. And 1 hour ago, I was in Al-Zintan city. This is one of the cities whose residents in the western side of the country that rose against al-Gaddafi. A battalion of tanks was deployed 4 or 5 days ago around the city when the revolutions managed to defeat the battalion and now took control of the city. Al-Zintan and Yisrin cities, both of them were cleared of all the security and army personnel. 4 tanks now are in the possession of the revolution and the people.
Well, there are protests taking place across the region. Demonstrations against corruption and lack of basic services are taking place in Iraq, with some violence being reported. At least 2 people have been killed in the northern city of Hawija. In Baghdad, protesters have been squaring off against riot police, as Tariq Bazley reports.
The spirit of protest very much alive in Iraq. Despite the capital and virtual security lockdown, thousands took to the streets. Their day of rage inspired by recent events in North Africa.
Our demands is the following. First, prevent corruption by making laws to prevent that and apply it correctly for the favourite of the Iraqi people.
Soldiers searched protesters trying to enter Liberation Square. They barricaded a bridge leading to the city's so-called Green Zone government area. At one point, protesters threw stones at riot police, who forced them back against the wall. In the southern city Basra, around 3,000 also took to the streets to protest against corruption and a lack of basic services. Concrete slabs surrounding the Basra government building were knocked over. Clashes too with riot police in Mosul, where provincial government offices were set on fire. 8 years after the US-led invasion and the fall of Saddam Hussein, there's clear anger on the streets. Development has been slow to come to the country, and after recent events in the region, there are fears that anger could drive a broader call for change. Tariq Bazley, Al Jazeera.
Huge demonstration too in Egypt, where people are keeping up pressure on the transitional government. Many thousands have turned out in Cairo's Tahrir Square, Liberation Square, after Friday prayers. They want the military leaders to appoint a new cabinet and lift the decades-old emergency rule. This report from Azhar Sukri.
Cairo's most famous square, once again filled with thousands of Egyptians. A month to the day since the tidal wave of protests swept President Hosni Mubarak from power, the calls for change have yet to die down. Officially, the gathering was to celebrate the success of the revolution. This amateur video showed street vendors and a generally calm atmosphere. But activists used it as an opportunity to maintain pressure on military rulers over promised reforms.
We're asking for the rest of the demands to be met, which is dismantle the state security investigation to have Shafi resign and to say no to the emergency law. Also to protect our right of demonstrations, our right to be in the streets.
They also called for Mubarak to be put on trial and the release of political prisoners. It was a clear reminder of the discontent sweeping through the Middle East. So many leaders now facing the wrath of their citizens. Azhar Sukri, Al Jazeera.
Back to Libya and the ongoing protests there against Muammar Gaddafi. We're joined on the line now by a resident from Tripoli. We're not going to name him for his own protection, but thank you for joining us. I gather you are demonstrating against Gaddafi. Can you tell us what is happening there where you are? I apologise for the sound problems there. We are getting a simultaneous translation. Let me try again. Hello, my guest from Tripoli. Can I ask you... Hello, hi. You're speaking to Al Jazeera. Can you describe what's happening where you are? What's happening in Tripoli?
I can speak in Arabic, and after that you can translate it.
Absolutely. You go ahead, sir, and we will translate it. What's happening there now?
I can speak in Arabic too. I can explain to you what happened exactly. And after that, أيوة السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين على كيد الظالمين. أنا في قلب الحدث في طرابلس حاليا والبداية كانت في بعد صلاة الجمعة.
After Friday sermons, we heard gunfires. The protests marched from Murad Aga Mosque heading towards Tripoli. We were joined by many other protesters groups. When we reached Al-Hani cemetery at the graveyard, a gun erupted and random firing against us started.
We're told that some people have died in those clashes. Do you know anything about any deaths?
Hello? Give me your phone. Give me your phone. Give me your phone. You cannot speak to Al Jazeera. You cannot speak to Al Jazeera. Give me this phone.
That sounds like our guest has been intercepted by a member of the security forces who has just taken his phone off, and we don't know what happened there, but somebody was clearly yelling at him to give them the phone. Are you still there? Are you still there, sir? OK, we have lost our guest. We don't know what happened, but as you heard, someone grabbed the phone off him and was saying that he couldn't speak to Al Jazeera. And it is an illustration of the tensions that are going on in Tripoli. We will try and get him back and try and get some indication of what's happening in Tripoli. Let's go to Yemen now, where hundreds of thousands of pro- and anti-government activists have staged rival rallies in the capital, Sana'a. Thousands have been marching against President Saleh in towns and cities across the country. Earlier, he ordered the formation of a committee to open talks with protesters who are demanding that he step down. Let's get more on that from Hashim Albro. Joins me on the line now from Sana'a. Hashim, there were two separate rallies going on here, one in favour of Saleh and one against him. How tightly controlled were they, and what's happening now?
Well, there was a significant presence of security forces here in the capital, Sana'a, to prevent any clashes between the government supporters and the pro-democracy protesters. They also came after clerics here in Yemen said that every clan should stick to a particular square to prevent further escalation. We remember that a few days ago there were a lot of tension here, clashes between government loyalists and protesters, which led to at least 2 people killed here and dozens injured. Now, President Saleh would like to see people come to him, talk about the future of the country, but the thousands of young Yemenis now who are protesting in the capital are saying it's really too late. And what we'd like to see in Yemen is a radical change, a new political establishment that takes over. And President Saleh, who has ruled the country for 32 years, leave the country.
It's a very difficult situation for President Saleh because he has situations on all fronts. He's got rebels in the north, he's got a separation campaign going on in the south, and now he has these calls for him to promote reform and stand down.
Absolutely. This is a man who has been increasingly besieged by his loyalists are starting to abandon him. We have we've seen some defections, people joining the protesters, members of the parliament, members of the ruling party, senior officials in his government. And it feels like that there's nothing to do to reverse the tide now in the country. But he's pretty much concerned about the fact that Yemen is grappling with a series of problems, a secessionist movement in the south, a rebellion in the north, and Al-Qaeda, which is operating in the central part of the country. And he is voicing concerns that if the situation is degenerating here in the country, that could lead to further clashes, more violent. Every house is practically a cache of weapon here in Yemen. So we might find ourselves in a position where you would see people taking their arms and taking to the streets. This is exactly why his government has been saying we would like to solve the problem through peaceful negotiations instead of taking to the streets, because Yemen is not like Libya, Egypt or Tunisia. It's a completely different context, a completely different scenario.
Okay, Hashim, thank you for that update. Hashim Albra updating us on the situation in Sana'a in Yemen there. In Iraq, of course, more protests against government corruption and lack of basic services. There have been several rallies in cities throughout Iraq. Let's talk to Al Jazeera's Jane Araf, who's there for us. Jane, you're in Baghdad. You've been out and about. What have you been seeing?
Well, as night is falling here, the green zone is completely cut off. The green zone, that heavily guarded area where the government is for the most part. The demonstration on Tahrir Square got close enough to the green zone that Iraqi riot police came out with water cannons, sound guns, sound bombs rather, and batons to try to beat them back from concrete barriers they had erected on a bridge. As we were leaving, the police were preventing other protesters from joining that demonstration by guarding the other bridges around the city. And the curfew that bans all vehicle traffic and has brought the city to a standstill is still in force. The airport has been closed. There are no flights going in and out. The entire city has come to a standstill after what the government has warned has been a protest backed by Baathists, which could have been infiltrated by Al-Qaeda. Shuli?
Yeah, it's interesting, that line from the government saying that the protest organisers were Saddam loyalists and terrorists, and it's an indication of just how badly the government wanted to stop these protests.
Absolutely. It's taken extraordinary measures. This curfew, which was put in force with literally half an hour's notice last night, appears to be unprecedented. I've heard reports of people trying to drive pregnant women to